Welcome to Composition Essentials. My name is John Greengo, and I've got a great class in store for you. This is a class for photographers, all types of photographers, all skill levels, all genres, because composition is something that should be important to all of us. Now, composition is not just a random collection of ideas. It's a combination of science and emotion about how we physically see the world, how people see our photographs, and how we emotionally react to them. Now, I teach a lot of classes on the technical part of photography, cameras and exposure and focus. And all of that's really important just to get you up to kind of a baseline. None of those elements are going to make you have a great photograph. It's composition that is going to take you over the top and really help you out in making a great photograph. It also helps you in just seeing what could make a great photograph. And in this class, I have compiled what are the most important elements that everyone needs to know and be reminded of from time to time as to what's important. So let's dive in and let me tell you what we're going to do in here. First off, let me give you my little definition of composition, at least as far as a photographer's point of view. It's just organizing all the visual elements. We have all sorts of things to deal with. We have subjects and background and foreground. We have lighting. We're going to be using lenses and so forth to organize our subjects and look at the field of view in front of us. And how we organize that says everything about the story we're trying to tell. Now, the goal, I think for most of us, is to make order out of chaos. There is a world of chaos going around. And as many people before me have talked about in photography, photographers start with everything and we try to distill it down to what's most important. But it's key not to go too far because we still want to keep our photos interesting with a little bit of randomness and fun and mystery and so forth. And so it's a combination of these two aspects of organizing it, but still having some fun with it. And so this is what we're going to do in here is we're going to go through all the important different elements of photography, and I'm going to teach you each section, one element about it that's going to build upon it as we go forward. And so these are our sections here in the class, and there is a PDF that goes along with the class that will help you review with visual information as to what is important. But let's get started right now with some theory. All right. A little bit of understanding about how we see and how we interpret things around us. And that is because we need to talk about this because the way we see things with our own eyes and the way we interpret that information with our brain is very, very different than the way a camera and a lens sees the world. And one of my favorite ways to illustrate this is something that I enjoyed when I was a child, and that was optical illusions. And so I remember looking at these in books as a kid and always just being fascinated how it warped my mind at the time. So here's our first optical illusion. We have this yellowish dot, and we have one of them surrounded by a bunch of large black dots and one surrounded by smaller black dots. How large are those yellow dots? Are they the same size? They don't look like it to me, but when you compare them, yeah, they're exactly the same size. And so what this means to photographers is that your subject is affected by the objects and the surrounding that that subject is in. And so you may have a very important subject, but you need to be looking at everything else in the frame. It's very important. Here's basically the same concept again. And so which of these balls is larger, the red one or the blue one? And of course, you know I'm playing games with you here, and they are exactly the same size. But the background, other subjects in the photograph and in the view of area is very important. And so keep that in mind. Next up, let's talk about inclusion and exclusion, the way we look at a group of objects. So these little blue pyramids, they all look pretty similar. They're kind of in slightly random positions, but they're part of a group. They're all the same. But if we just turn one of them a slightly different direction, then it stands out. Our eyes are prone to picking out something that is a little bit different, whether it's the orientation, the size, the shape, or the color. we immediately notice these differences and it draws our attention. And so we have to be aware of everything in our frame, especially the elements that are going to pull our viewers' eyes out of the story that we're trying to tell. Our brains do a number of funny things, that's for sure. One of the things that we do is we're constantly trying to figure things out. We're trying to connect the dots. And while we do this, we end up making assumptions and conclusions without full information. We're looking at a line with a circle in front of it, right? Well, technically we're looking at two lines, but it's hard for our brain not to connect those lines together. All right, here's another one of our subject is affected by its surrounding environment. So I got two checkerboards here, and let's change the middle square on either of these and look at the brightness of how much does this square right here in the middle compare with everything else around it. And are those two squares in the middle the same? And you know I'm playing optical illusions with you here. And they are indeed exactly the same, but they look very different. It looks brighter on the left because it's surrounded by a dark environment, and it looks darker over on the right because it's surrounded with a brighter environment. And they are indeed exactly the same shade of gray. All right. Get ready for some intense colors here, folks. So let's take a look. Over on the left side of the screen, you might see a little bit of purple. And over on the right side, you see a bit of pink. And they look very different in color to me. I'm guessing they look different in color to you if you have normal eyes. But if we bring them together, you will find that I am playing optical illusions with you here. And they are indeed exactly the same. They are affected by the surrounding color here. And so we have to be aware as photographers that our perception of color is influenced by the other colors around it, because we draw comparisons of what's this like? Well, let's look at other things right around what that thing is. And so the way we see the world and what we think of what we see is not always exactly what we think it is. And so be aware that we have this, and there are even more of these, but I think that's enough for you to get the idea that we have to be looking at what we are going to be photographing in a new way as a photographer. Next, I want to talk about the visual perception. When we look at something, we look at a scene, we look at a subject, a person, what exactly is of interest to us? What draws our attention to one scene versus another scene? Now, I don't have any scientific surveys to back me up, but the thing that I would say is the most influential in what will draw someone's attention is movement. If something is moving very quickly, people tend to notice it very quickly and very easily. The flowers blowing in the wind here at Mount Rainier National Park draw your attention. Just that subtle little movement. They're not moving a lot, but they're moving a little bit, and that draws your attention. When you take a still photograph of it, and they're no longer moving, the focus tends to change on what's important in the photograph and what draws your attention. And so realize that in some situations, this is where human vision isn't the same as cameras, and cameras have a bit of a weakness. We're capturing still images. There's some great things that can be done with that. There are things that we can do with the camera that you cannot do with your own eyes. But this is one thing that our eyes have an advantage of over our cameras. Next up, size. We look at things that are larger in size. These little water holes in the rock, they are not that big. But because I've got my camera very close to the subject with a wide-angle lens, they appear to be quite large. They appear to be as large as the clouds in the background. And so by my positioning and my choice of lenses, I've increased the importance of these different holes in the water in the rock in this composition. As we mentioned before in the theory section, things that are unique stand out. And so this one red tulip stands out much more than any of the other purple ones. Now, I don't know if it's true, but the story that I heard, this is from the Skagit Fields just north of Seattle. There was a group of photographers up photographing a situation like this, a field of tulips with one tulip a different color. Somebody comes over, don't know if they're a photographer, but they were taking photos, and they looked at everything and they exclaimed out loud, "Oh, it's such a wonderful, beautiful scene, except that one darn flower is the wrong color. I'm going to go pick it." And all the photographers said, "No, no, 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 don't do that." And because the photographers knew that that was the element that they were going for. They liked the idea of having that one element stand out. Now, we may not all agree. Some people want everything to match a perfect pattern, and that is a great photograph too. There's two different things to look at. But when there's one element that stands out, it is going to draw your attention, and it's going to be an extremely strong element in the photograph. Humans are curious people, and we want to know why things are, and if something seems out of place and something seems unusual, we want to know more about it. We're going to look at that photograph more frequently. And so if there's something unusual, and this is a goat tree in Morocco, and yeah, this is where all the tour buses stop and everybody stops to take photos here because it's so unusual, you got to capture it on camera. And so if anything is out of place, unusual, unique, that is going to draw people's attention. Now, this can be good and this can be bad. If you have a great subject and a nice background, but there's something unusual also going on somewhere else that's not important to you, that's going to draw people's eye away from the story you're trying to tell in that photograph. This one's more based on science. Light. Light is very important, and we tend to notice things that are lighter in color than darker in color. And so whatever is the lightest part in the frame is what's going to draw our attention. And so we need to be very aware of how bright our subject is and how bright other things are in the frame as well. And can we control that? Can we shoot it at a different time of day so that it helps us? Can we turn the lights up, turn the lights down? Is there anything that we can do to control this? So lighting is another very important part of photography, but it does come into play in composition as well. Shapes. Shapes is our first level of recognition. You can understand what an object is by just seeing the shape in a very small size if it's got a unique shape to it. And so playing with shapes, especially when we get to a section on silhouettes, is very important because we don't need all the information. You can see a human figure and you can start making assumptions about how tall that person is. Is it a male? Is it female? Any other categories that you want of, what is this? What is it not? You can identify with a shape. All right. What do you see in this photograph? What do you think is important? And how does that change when we add color? The boats were really kind of an afterthought in the black and white image. It's the building that was clearly prominent. But now that we have these colored boats in the front, our eyes are drawn to color, especially bright, vibrant colors like the reds and blues and yellows. And that is going to draw our attention. For good or for bad, that draws our attention into a photograph. And so you have to be aware of this when you're thinking about all the other colors in the photograph. Our eyes are drawn to sharpness. And this image here, I think, very clearly shows it because kind of the center of the image, right where the escalator is going down, it's very sharp, and that's where your eye wants to look. Over on the sides, you have blurry signs on the walls and other railings and things moving around that have a slow shutter speed to them, which causes them to be blurry. And it's not pleasant to look at that part. Your eye is drawn to the middle. And so if there are areas of sharpness, that is where people's eyes are going to go to. Contrast. Contrast shows us details. And so when we have a sharp contrast in those cloud colors from brights to darks, that's interesting. Things that are not interesting is, a plain, even gray. That's not nearly as interesting as something that has strong details and lines to it, and that comes from contrast. If you can read, your eyes are drawn to text. It's hard to not look at this and not read the words. We see words, we read them. It's hard to look at a billboard and not read it if it's got big, bold letters on it. And so if there is text in your photograph, people are going to read it if they can. They're curious. Remember that. Humans are curious and we want to know more, and we will read if that's what it takes to learn more about what's going on in that photograph. Humans are curious about other humans. And so if there is a person in your shot that is going to draw attention, people want to know, who is this person? What's going on? Why are they there? Why is this situation like this? This raises a lot of questions. It causes people to think about the photograph, and it's where their eyes are going to go in a photograph. And so if there's a person that's not supposed to be in your photograph, that's a really important element, because people's eyes are drawn to see, what's that person doing? Do I know them? What's going on with them? We are also drawn to animals, and so they don't have to be very big in the frame. And so this is also an example of the shape. Just the shape of lets us know that it is an animal, and the fact that it's an animal lets us know that it's a little bit more important than everything else, than the water or the trees in this particular photograph. And so we are drawn to any sort of animal, and that will attract our eyes to that part of the frame. And of course, we're attracted to faces. We want to see faces because there's a lot of emotions that can be gleaned from the person's eyes, their facial expressions. And so you can tell what's going on. Are they curious? Are they happy? Are they angry? You can tell a lot by just seeing a person's face. And when you do see a face, you're drawn to the eyes. And so if you're focusing on a person, you really want to make sure their eyes are in focus. You want to make sure their eyes are framed right. And so these are some various elements that will draw people's attention to one spot or another in the frame. And so knowing this basic theory is going to help us out as we move on to other parts of this class. And so now we know why people react in certain ways when they see certain photographs. They're drawn to this, they're not drawn to that. And this is going to help piece the rest of the puzzle together.